So, 5 pillars of body composition. Pillar number 2, protein. Probably one of the most talked about subjects in the health and fitness industry, and especially the plant-based fitness industry, is protein. A fair amount of misunderstanding out there, and we hope to clear it up in this presentation for you. While training drives the adaptations within the body, nutrition plays a permissive role in ensuring that muscle protein balance is optimized. So we can train all we want, we can provide all the stimulus that we want, and we will grow somewhat. But there will come a time where nutrition needs to be optimized in order to play that role in ensuring muscle protein balance is optimized. And this is, you can't see that, that's from Dr. Eric Trexler, a very smart man on this subject of protein, and has some great insight around plant-based proteins as well, if you want to check out his work. Now, why does protein matter in the first place? As we just discussed, protein balance is essential. And protein balance is basically when muscle protein synthesis is greater than muscle protein breakdown. So when synthesis, the creation of new muscle fibers, or the creation of new muscle proteins, I should say, in order to create larger and more muscle fibers, is greater than muscle protein breakdown when we're actually using and utilizing amino acids for energy. So we want muscle protein synthesis to be higher than breakdown for muscle growth and for changing body composition. And how this looks is, you can see on this graph here, you have a meal and you have this nice spike in muscle protein synthesis. And then, that drops off over a certain amount of time after that meal, and you go into, where muscle protein breakdown is higher and you get these faster losses. And then you have another meal and muscle protein synthesis spikes again. And, we have another time period where we have an increase in synthesis as opposed to breakdown. And what we're looking for across a day and across a week and so on and so forth, we're looking for substantial amount of muscle protein synthesis, so greater spikes and greater areas under the curve of that muscle protein synthesis, and we want less and less of the breakdown. And the way we do that is what we're going to cover in this presentation. But that's really the crux of what we're looking for when it comes to gaining muscle tissue and changing body composition. It is also beneficial for your hair, your skin, nails, bone density in the elderly as well. All essential benefits of protein. Also, the performance benefits, so like we've discussed, supports increased muscle protein synthesis and muscle recovery. Protein also creates the greatest metabolic response to eating. So the thermic effect of food, the energy it takes and the energy cost of ingesting, metabolizing, digesting proteins, a lot higher than the other macronutrients. So it does have a greater metabolic response, which is a good thing if we're wanting to reduce body fat and increase calorie expenditure. Satiety, it reduces the release of ghrelin, which is one of the gut appetite hormones. So when we have protein, it tends to blunt ghrelin release and, it helps us to feel a little bit more satiated after a meal. And lowers spontaneous calorie consumption. So if we're consuming, a decent amount of protein each day, in all likelihood, with most people, you see them ingesting less of that kind of subconscious, or I should say unconscious kind of eating or mindless eating, and we can reduce calorie consumption through increasing our protein intake, increasing satiety, and just having an overall more control over our intake. So that's really why protein matters as a whole. Now, how much protein do we actually need to maximize this muscle protein synthesis response that we've been talking about? The collective agreement among researchers is that a protein intake of around 1.2 up to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is sufficient to allow adaptation to training for individuals at or above their energy needs. So what that means is for people that are either at maintenance calorie intake or in a calorie surplus. So that seems to be sufficient to allow that adaptation process from training. But if we want to optimize for body composition specifically, so building lean muscle mass, dropping body fat, and seeing as there's little to no downsides of actually going higher, despite what, some of the things you may have read about, kidney damage and blah, blah, blah. None of it's backed in the research. Shooting for 1.6 and up to 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day from a variety of protein sources, with alongside 1 to 2 added pea and rice blend shakes will do the trick. Okay, so slightly higher intake of 1.6 to 2.2 is probably that sweet spot that we want to be in for optimizing muscle protein synthesis per day and optimizing the adaptations within the body, so we're creating that muscle mass that we're after for changing body composition. So that is around 128 to 176 grams within that ballpark there for an 80 kilogram individual, and 96 to 132 grams of protein per day for a 60 kilo individual. So you can see it's a decent amount of protein, but the lower end of that is very, very achievable. The higher end of that is one where you probably want to include a couple of protein shakes a day to help you. The lower the body fat of an individual, so the less, the more lean somebody is, if they say sub 10% for a male or sub 16, 17% for a female, and the greater the calorie deficit, so the faster they're losing body weight and the more aggressive their diet is, the higher the protein intake should be. So they should be hitting more in the range of 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilo of lean body mass. So that's a much, much higher calorie intake than what we've already suggested here. But that's specifically for someone who is very lean, maybe working towards a bodybuilding show, or someone who's going through a very aggressive fat loss phase, and they're wanting to maintain as much muscle tissue as they can. So it's definitely not for most people, and probably not suggested. But if you are one of those people, it's probably a smart idea to try and get that protein intake up above that 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. And if you know your body fat percentage, then you can use the calculation here, 2.3 to 3.1 grams per kilogram of lean body mass. So that's per kilogram of muscle mass, right? Cool. And then the lower end is suggested for maintenance and gaining phases where muscle loss is less of a concern. So generally, if you're at maintenance calorie intake or you're in a muscle gain phase and a calorie surplus, you can probably sit around that 1.6 to 1.8 grams of protein per kilo and be totally fine, because we're not in a deficit where muscle loss is something that's going to be of more importance to us. So what about plant protein? Plant protein sources aren't the most potent gram for gram stimulators of MPS due to lower essential amino acid counts and digestibility and absorption. Okay, so that is a fact that plant proteins aren't as potent as animal proteins. Totally cool though, because their shortcomings can be mitigated by eating enough total daily protein, essential amino acids, and leucine. So if you're only eating one protein source for majority of your protein, like wheat protein or something like that, yeah, you're probably not going to get the most out of your protein for changes in body composition. However, for most people, you're going to be, having a variety of protein sources, hopefully choosing some really quality protein sources that have decently high levels of leucine, one of the amino acids that is very important for stimulating muscle protein synthesis, and ensuring that we're actually including enough protein per day, like we've just discussed, within that range, and you're going to be pretty much good to go. And there's been some recent research in 2020, 2021, where we're seeing that the long-term effects of animal protein versus plant protein on body composition, on muscle gain within a training program, is basically not significantly different within those studies. So both groups, the plant protein eating group and the animal protein eating group, achieved around about the same amount of muscle gain, even though they had different plant sources. But because protein intake was the same throughout the different groups, we see a similar response. Plant protein sources do contain more calories per gram, so we have to be aware of that compared to some of the animal products. So meeting high protein targets on a vegan diet can get challenging during those lower calorie phases. So if you are in a fat loss phase, you've chosen to go down that route to improve your body composition, then yeah, you're probably going to have to be aware that a lot of the plant protein sources, soy protein comes with a little bit of fat, wheat protein will come with a little bit of the carbohydrates, the protein from legumes comes with those carbohydrates as well. Some of the mock meats may come along with a little extra fats and things like this. So we have to be aware of the fact that they're not just pure protein like you could get from animal products, say, egg whites or lean chicken and things like this, lean fish, which are basically just pure protein. So being aware of this and making protein choices and protein selections to take into account the fact that you are on a calorie controlled diet is one of the most important parts of achieving a fat loss phase or succeeding in a fat loss phase. This challenge can be overcome though with a couple of protein shakes per day and appropriate protein sources. So choosing the right proteins that have a high amount of protein density, and that's what we want to jump into next. Actually, on the next slide. First, before we do that, does timing matter for protein? So this is one of those things that often comes up around meal timing and different diets and what's the most optimal for this and that. And when it comes to fat loss and body recomposition, basically meal timing is not as important as people think. So there's a study, it was a 14-day study. Participants ate 1.7 grams of protein per kilo of fat-free mass. And there was no difference in whole body protein synthesis and breakdown between the bolus protein group. So this was the group that ate 79% of their protein in one single meal. And then the spread protein group, which they ate their protein spread over 4 different meals. So there was no real difference in muscle protein synthesis between those two groups specifically and breakdown specifically for fat loss. So the potential benefit of regular meal timing, there is a potential benefit of regular meal timing for satiety and social purposes, right? So if you are, consuming protein throughout the day with other high satiety nutrients or foods, potatoes, legumes, broccoli, cauliflower, these types of foods, leafy greens. If you're consuming protein alongside these other whole foods, really satiating foods, it's going to be a lot better for your long-term adherence to a calorie deficit in order to lose body fat. And of course, social purposes as well. No one, wants to be eating all of their protein in one meal, right? You want to be able to spread that out so you can have meals out with friends and enjoy various different social occasions throughout your fitness and fat loss and muscle gain journeys. So basically, does meal timing matter for fat loss and body composition or body recomposition? No, not really. It doesn't. You can kind of choose when you want to have your meals based off personal preference, which is super cool. It takes away one of those extra things to think about. Now, on the other hand, for muscle gain and for bulking, once enough protein is provided for MPS, it peaks and then returns to baseline, known as the muscle full effect. So basically, what they're saying is, when you have a meal with protein, specifically when we're looking at muscle gain instead of fat loss, we do want to make sure that we are peaking muscle protein synthesis on regular intervals throughout the day. You can see this in this little graph here, the muscle full effect. You can see muscle protein synthesis spike, and then over a certain amount of time, usually around 2 to 3 hours, that muscle protein synthesis response will drop down, and you get this muscle full effect where no more further amino acids being ingested will actually create another spike. And so you have to have this, lag period or a time period where you have to wait and then ingest another amount of protein in a few hours' time to create another MPS response. So the goal is to maximally stimulate MPS within the right amount of protein space, throughout the day. So basically, regular feedings of protein every 2.5 to 4 hours and 4 to 6 feedings per day is a good place to be. So that's specifically for gaining muscle and for bulking. We do want to have regular meals throughout the day. And each feeding is probably best to be around 0.3 to 0.5 grams of protein per meal. So if you're an 80 kilogram individual, you're probably looking at 30 to 40 grams of protein per meal is a really good place to be to maximally stimulate MPS and get the leucine content of those meals high enough to do that. And then it's just about having regular meals from there on out. So does it matter for muscle gain? Yes, it probably does. It's not something you have to freak out about and only focus on, but it's something to be aware of, that you want to have regular meals of high protein based meals throughout the day. So 5 tips to increase protein. Now this is where we're going to talk about protein sourcing a little bit more. What kind of protein should we actually be choosing to get the most quality out of our meals? So number 1, stop relying on pumpkin seeds. You would have seen infographics like this on social media all the time where they list the different plant protein sources per their 100-gram weights. So you can see, potato, 2.5 grams of protein per 100 grams. Tofu there you can see is at 17 grams of protein per 100 grams. At the bottom there, the top of the table here for pumpkin is for protein per 100 grams is pumpkin seeds. So based on this table, you would think, great, pumpkin seeds is a phenomenal protein source. I'm going to fill my meals with pumpkin seeds as much as I can, and I will achieve my body composition goals. But in reality, per 100 grams of pumpkin seeds, you get 32 grams of protein. That's a decent amount of protein, and that would be sufficient, right? But it also comes along with 643 calories. So I don't know about you, but I don't really want to be wasting all my calories on pumpkin seeds. I prefer to eat a whole meal of maybe tofu and vegetables and fruits and things like this. So when we're looking at achieving a body composition result, it's not just about choosing the protein that's highest protein per 100 grams. It's actually about choosing the most protein per calorie. So that's why I've put together this infographic here, which is a little more appropriate for body composition goals, is starting to include higher protein density foods. So these proteins here are protein per 100 calories, not per 100 grams. So how much protein am I getting for 100 calories? We can see at the top, and this might be really small for you guys, you might not be able to see it, but at the top of the list here is pea and rice protein. All right, so a protein powder blend, around about 20 grams of protein per 100 calories. You've got vital wheat gluten or seitan is at 19 grams per 100 calories, so a really great source of protein. Sun-fed chicken, which is a pea protein type meat substitute in New Zealand and Australia, is at, I believe that is 16 grams per 100 calories. TVP, textured vegetable protein, you've got microprotein or corn. You've got black bean edamame pasta at 14 grams, really good option as well. Lupini beans, nutritional yeast, tempeh, another good option. Tofu, powdered peanut butter, soy milk, edamame, and lentils down the bottom there. So you'd see if someone was just relying purely on lentils or beans and things like that, they're probably getting a decent amount of protein, but they're also going to probably not be getting as much protein as they could for the calorie cost of that particular food. And if we are sticking to a calorie controlled diet for fat loss, we do want to make sure that we're getting the most bang for a buck out of our protein sources. So start including higher protein density foods like protein shakes, like seitan, like sun-fed chicken, like textured vegetable protein, black bean, edamame pastas. These types of things are going to be really good choices for you. Number 3, include a protein shake 1 to 2 times a day. Really simple one. It just helps to get an easy 50 to 60 grams of protein. And then we've got number 4, adding those bonus proteins as well. So this is a cool little infographic of just saying, hey, look, those little extra things like the pumpkin seeds, they do actually add up over time. And if you can add, you've got your main meal of a protein dense option like seitan, for example, and then you add some of these bonus proteins to that meal, you're going to be hitting that 30 to 40 gram protein in a meal really easily. So things like adding peas, hemp seeds, adding things like quinoa, nutritional yeast, kale, peanut butter, whole wheat bread. These all have decent amounts of protein in them per serving or per appropriate serving. So definitely things to be looking at to add to your meals just to get that little bonus protein. And lastly here, plan ahead, prep, and don't rely on others. So that's just a tip around lifestyle design, is that you can't rely on others to provide your protein for you. You don't know what the meal is going to include if you're going out for a meal at a restaurant or to a friend's house. So plan ahead, prep your food ahead of time if you need to. Buy some protein bars, have them on hand, maybe have some protein powder at the office and at home so you're not caught out. And then start prepping those really high density proteins as much as you can. You might start looking into how to make seitan or looking into the different meat alternatives at your supermarket, or finding where you can get the best tempeh in your local town as well. So that is the presentation on tofu. Choose high protein per calorie options and aim to consume multiple sources per day. So lots of variation, Don't rely on just one protein source for your entire protein intake for the day. You might have a meal of, pea and rice protein in your oats in the morning. You might have a seitan meal for lunch with some added peas and nutritional yeast. And then in the evening, you might have a really nice tempeh dish with some legume pasta. And that way you get a lot of different variety of different proteins. And of course, the added benefit of the nutritional content of those foods, things like vitamins and minerals, phytonutrients, things like this. You might have to put a little bit more effort into the selection of protein sources, but it's very doable and something that shouldn't be too difficult for most people. Cool. So that is protein, part of the 5 pillars of body composition. Next up, we have training for body composition. So what does training look like? What should it look like? What are the most important aspects of creating a physique and building lean tissue while we drop body fat?